okay. You will be fine. You won't die.
It was a cold and gray morning in Manhattan. The skyline just barely visible through the thick fog that hung low over the city. The towering skyscrapers, symbols of power and wealth, seem almost menacing today. Inside a sleek, modern hospital, one of the wealthiest men in America, Michael Westbrook, sat at the edge of his son's hospital bed, his heart racing with a dread he had never known. His son, Alex Westbrook, the heir to the Westbrook fortune, lay motionless under the harsh fluorescent lights. The machines that once hummed with a rhythmic pulse now beeped sporadically in a sterile, cold environment only seemed to amplify the silence. Alex had been in a coma for days, his condition worsening every hour. How much longer? Michael muttered to himself, glancing over at the doctors gathered at the foot of the bed. Despite his vast fortune and influence, there was nothing they could do. Money had always been his tool, his weapon in the world, but it was useless now. Michael's hands trembled as he clutched his son's cold, pale hand, hoping for a sign that things could change. Alex, just 27, was a promising young entrepreneur, the one destined to take the reins of the Westbrook Enterprises, a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate. But now, all that wealth, all that power couldn't save him, and neither could Michael's contacts or his resources. In the corner of the room, a nurse shuffled in, whispering something in the doctor's ear before stepping back, leaving Michael with his thoughts. His gaze shifted to the digital clock on the wall, counting down the moments like a ticking bomb. One day was all his son had left to live, according to the doctors. The machines that monitored Alex's heartbeats were no longer stable. No matter what they did, Alex was slipping further away. But Michael wasn't ready to accept defeat. Not yet. Not when his empire was on the line. Not when everything he had built could come crumbling down in an instant. Alex was his legacy, the next generation of the Westbrook dynasty. He had to find a way to save him. There had to be something, anything that could make a difference. That's when he heard the knock on the door. A young woman, barely in her 20s, stood in the doorway. She looked out of place in the sterile environment of the hospital, dressed in an old sweater and faded jeans, with messy brown hair tied back in a loose ponytail. Her eyes, though, held something that made Michael pause. Determination. "I'm here to help," she said, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "I've heard of your son's condition, and I know something that could save him." Michael stared at her, incredulous. "What could you possibly know about saving my son?" he demanded, his tone sharp, almost hostile. "Do you even know who I am?" She took a step forward, unfazed by his anger. "I'm Emma Summers, and I'm not here to sell you anything, Mr. Westbrook. I'm here because I believe I have the answer." Michael laughed bitterly. "You think you have the answer? You think you can save him? This is beyond the power of any miracle you can offer. He's dying and you're wasting your time." Emma didn't flinch. "I've seen this before. I've seen people on the brink of death who came back. All it takes is one small thing. One thing that the doctors wouldn't even consider." Michael narrowed his eyes, the skepticism evident on his face. "And what might that be?" Emma reached into her bag and pulled out a small vial of liquid. The bottle was old, its edges worn, and the liquid inside shimmered with a faint, eerie glow. She held it up in front of Michael, her expression unwavering. "This is something my grandmother used to use. It's an ancient remedy. I know it sounds crazy, but I've seen it work. And it might be the only thing left that can save your son. For a moment, Michael stared at the vial, his brain working through the possibility. Could this be some kind of snake oil? Or was this girl just desperate for attention? The whole idea seemed absurd. Yet something about her confidence, her quiet determination, made him hesitate. "Let me try," she said, taking a step closer to Alex's bedside. "I know it's a long shot, but it's better than doing nothing." Michael hesitated. The doctors had told him it was too late. They had told him that Alex was beyond saving, that his time was up. But what did he have to lose? One day, that's all he had left. "Fine," he said, his voice raw with frustration. "Try whatever you want. But if this doesn't work, I'll hold you responsible." Emma nodded, a hint of relief flashing across her face. She carefully uncorked the vial and approached Alex's bedside. Her hand shook slightly as she applied the liquid to his chest. Her eyes closed in concentration. Michael watched, his heart in his throat. The seconds felt like hours. Nothing happened. But then Alex's heart monitor beeped. Once, twice, a steady rhythm began to pulse through the machine. Emma stepped back, her expression softening as she met Michael's gaze. "It's not over yet, but it's a start." Michael couldn't believe it. For the first time in days, a small flicker of hope ignited in his chest. Could this mysterious liquid really be the key to saving his son? As Emma stepped back, Michael stood at the window, staring out at the Manhattan skyline, the city that had given him everything. But right now, it felt like it might also take everything away. His empire was on the verge of collapse, and his son's life was hanging by a thread. But for the first time, he felt like he had a chance to save everything. The hours following Emma's intervention passed like a blur, with hope flickering and fading in a constant, unpredictable rhythm. Michael stood by his son's bed, unable to leave. His mind was a whirl of confusion and disbelief. The liquid, that strange and ancient remedy from a girl he didn't know, had somehow caused Alex's heart rate to stabilize. At least, that's what the monitors told him. Alex was still unconscious, still lying motionless, but his pulse was steady now, and his oxygen levels were within the normal range. It was a small victory, but it felt like nothing short of a miracle. And miracles didn't happen in Michael's world. Not in his ruthless business empire, where everything had a price and nothing was left to chance. Michael couldn't understand it. His entire life had been about control. The business, the mansion, the luxury, the world he had carefully crafted for himself and his son. Everything had always been under his command. But here, in this sterile hospital room, he was helpless. And the more he thought about it, the more it grated on him. Why should this girl, with no money, no power, no connections, be the one to hold the key to saving his son? It didn't make sense. Everything about her, her unassuming appearance, her belief in something that could only be described as superstition, was so foreign to him. And yet, here she was, standing by his son's side, having done what neither his wealth nor his connections had been able to achieve. She wasn't even trying to claim credit. She had quietly slipped into background, standing off to the side, as though she knew her work was done. Michael could feel his resentment bubbling up again, but he had to push it down. His son was alive. That was all that mattered. Emma was sitting in the corner of the room now, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her eyes were focused on Alex, but she wasn't speaking. She wasn't trying to fill the silence with empty reassurances. She just let the silence hang in the air like the unspoken understanding between them. She had done what she came to do. Michael couldn't stand it anymore. "What do you want from me?" His voice was sharp, cutting through the room like a knife. He was done with playing games, done with the polite gratitude that had kept him on the edge for so long. Emma didn't flinch. She simply looked up at him, her expression soft but unwavering. "I don't want anything from you," she said quietly. "I just want to help." Michael scoffed, running a hand through his hair. "Help? With what? How are you helping? My son's life is hanging by a thread, and you think a vial of liquid is going to save him." "It's not just a liquid, Mr. Westbrook," she replied, her voice calm but firm. "It's the belief behind it. The understanding that we can't control everything, no matter how much we want to." Michael's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about? We control everything. I built this empire from the ground up. Everything in my life is controlled. Nothing is left to chance." Emma stood slowly, walking toward him. She didn't seem intimidated by his anger, and her calmness only seemed to fuel his frustration. "Control is an illusion," she said softly, almost like a prayer. "No matter how hard you try, there are things beyond our reach. Life itself is one of them. You can have all the money in the world, Mr. Westbrook, but you can't buy another moment of life for your son. What you have right now is a chance, a second chance. It's not something you can buy. It's something you've been given." Michael took a step back, his eyes hardening as he absorbed her words. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected her to look at him and speak the truth so plainly, to cut through all the arrogance, the power, and the pride that had defined him for so long. His empire, his money, his control, none of it could save his son. None of it could save him from the same fate everyone else faced: death. And in that moment, Michael realized something profound. He didn't know how to deal with this feeling. He wasn't sure how to face this vulnerability that Emma had exposed in him. He looked over at his son, still unconscious. The machines beeped softly, a gentle reminder that his son's life was still hanging in the balance. "If you really want to help," Michael said, his voice quieter now, "then what do we do next?" Emma smiled softly. "You wait." The simplicity of her answer struck him. Wait. Wait for something he couldn't control. Wait for something that might not even happen. Michael felt a wave of unease wash over him. Waiting was something he had never been good at. He had always been the one to make things happen, to create opportunities, to seize control. But here, with his son's life in the balance, waiting felt like the only thing left to do. As the hours ticked by, Michael found himself lost in thought. Was this truly the end of his control, or was it just the beginning of something new? He couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Emma had given him something he couldn't ignore, something that might just change his entire perspective on life, on his son, and on the very world he had spent his life building. The sound of Alex's heart monitor steadying seemed almost like a sign, a quiet reassurance that perhaps, just perhaps, the impossible was happening. But Michael couldn't shake the question that gnawed at him. Could this really be the start of something new? Or was this just a fleeting moment of hope, soon to be dashed by reality? The next morning, Michael found himself staring at the same sterile walls of the hospital room. The clock on the wall ticked relentlessly, each second reminding him of how little control he had left. His son was still unconscious, but the changes were subtle. The rise and fall of his chest seemed less labored. The skin that had been pale for so long now had a faint flush of color. But none of it was enough to comfort him. His mind kept racing, running through the same thoughts over and over. How could he have let this happen? How had his world come to this? He glanced over at Emma, who had remained at the hospital overnight, refusing to leave despite his earlier dismissal. Her calm presence was the only thing that seemed to bring any stability to the chaos inside his head. She sat by the window, reading something on her phone, completely at ease in this strange, foreign environment. Michael's gaze hardened. How could she be so calm? Here she was, some unknown girl with a remedy so bizarre it seemed almost impossible to believe, and yet it was working. His son was still alive, against all odds. Despite himself, Michael had started to wonder if she really could save him. What if there was more to this world than money and power? Could Emma's strange liquid really be a key to something deeper? Something his wealth could never reach? Do you believe in fate, Mr. Westbrook? Emma's voice cut through his thoughts, as if she could sense the turmoil that had been consuming him. Michael didn't answer immediately. The question hung in the air, as if it were a test, one he wasn't sure he was ready to take. Fate? The very idea seemed foreign to him, as though it belonged in the realm of superstition, not the sharp, precise world he controlled. Fate, he finally muttered, is for the weak. Emma didn't flinch. Instead, she simply nodded, acknowledging his response without judgment. And yet, here we are, your son's life, hanging by a thread, and the answer may lie in something you can't control. Michael clenched his fists at his sides, the tension in his body betraying the unease in his mind. You don't understand. I've spent my whole life controlling everything. Every decision, every move, it's all been calculated. If I couldn't control this, then what am I left with? She stood up and walked toward him, her expression softened but unwavering. Control isn't the answer to everything, Mr. Westbrook. Sometimes the hardest thing to do is let go, to trust. Trust, he scoffed. Trust doesn't keep you alive. Trust doesn't build empires. But it's trust that can save you, she said, her eyes locking onto his with quiet intensity. Trust isn't about abandoning power. It's about knowing when to share it. Her words hit Michael harder than he expected, the impact sinking deep into him. He wanted to argue. He wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all. But the truth of her words lingered, gnawing at him. He had spent his entire life holding control over his businesses, his relationships, his future. But none of that mattered now, did it? His son was in a coma, and no amount of money or power could change that. His empire seemed so small in comparison to the fragility of life. The irony wasn't lost on him. You think I'm weak? He turned to her, his voice rising with frustration. No, Emma replied softly, her gaze steady. I think you've been misguided. And that's okay. Everyone gets lost sometimes. It's just that the path to finding yourself is never the one you expect. There's again the mysticism, the certainty in her voice that all of this, the mystery liquid, the second chance for Alex, was part of some grand plan. And yet, as strange as it was, as illogical as it seemed, part of Michael couldn't help but feel a sliver of hope, a sliver of possibility that maybe, just maybe, things weren't as hopeless as they seemed. He turned back toward Alex's bed, staring at the still figure. His son, once vibrant and full of life, was now a mere shadow of his former self. The machines continued their monotonous beeping, but there was something different about the air today. The tension that had gripped the room for days seemed to loosen, ever so slightly. But Michael was still torn. Was it truly Emma's mysterious remedy that was doing this? Or had Alex simply turned a corner on his own? Was this the beginning of a miraculous recovery? Or was it just a fleeting moment of hope in the face of inevitable loss? For the first time in days, Michael felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Vulnerable. It was well into the afternoon when the doctors returned to check on Alex. Michael stood near the door, his arms folded tightly across his chest, as if holding on to something tangible. Emma had quietly excused herself to the hallway, giving them space. The head doctor, Dr. Simmons, looked at the monitor, then back at Michael. His expression was guarded, but there was a slight admiration in his eyes as he spoke. "Mr. Westbrook, it's remarkable," Dr. Simmons said, his voice low. "We've been monitoring his vitals all morning, and there's been a significant improvement." Michael's heart skipped a beat. What does that mean exactly? "It means he's stabilizing," Dr. Simmons explained. "His blood pressure is normalizing. His heart rate is steady. We're still cautious, of course, but it's the first real sign of progress we've seen since his collapse." Michael felt a mix of disbelief and cautious optimism. This was what he had hoped for. No, what he had demanded. But now that it was happening, he wasn't sure how to react. Was it truly the mysterious liquid, or was it simply a natural recovery? And was he really ready to let go of the control he'd spent his entire life cultivating? The room seemed to shrink as the doctor's words echoed in his mind. He had been so sure of himself, so certain that his power could control everything. But now, for the first time, he was faced with the reality that maybe, just maybe, the universe didn't operate on his terms. He glanced once more at Alex, watching as the boy's chest rose and fell with a steadier rhythm. It wasn't over yet, he knew that, but the light at the end of the tunnel was just beginning to appear. Maybe Emma was right. Maybe trust was part of the solution. Trust in others. And trust in something greater than himself. But deep down, Michael knew one thing for sure. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. As the days passed, the hospital room that had once been suffocating with fear and uncertainty now seemed to hold a breath of hope. The steady beeping of the heart monitor was no longer the ominous soundtrack it had been just days ago. There were no more frantic moments, no more rushed doctors or hushed conversations in the hall. The tension had dissipated, replaced by the quiet optimism that, perhaps, Alex was truly on the path to recovery. But for Michael, the relief was hard to grasp. Every time he glanced at his son, lying in that hospital bed, he couldn't shake the gnawing doubt. The doctors had given their reports, stating that Alex was improving. His vitals were stabilizing, and the signs of recovery were undeniable. But Michael still couldn't bring himself to fully believe it. He wanted to, of course. He needed to. But the question lingered in the back of his mind. Was this real or was it fluke? Then there was Emma. She had become a constant presence in their lives over the past few days. And despite his initial reluctance, Michael had started to respect her quiet strength. There was something about her, something in her unshakable belief that life wasn't just about control, that kept drawing him in. She wasn't the typical person he associated with. She wasn't rich, she wasn't powerful, and she didn't want anything from him. She didn't need his wealth or his influence, and that was what made her so intriguing, and at times irritating. Every conversation with her felt like a gentle reminder of how little he truly understood about his own life, about his own vulnerabilities. She was the one who had saved Alex, not through money, not through influence, but through something far more intangible. Trust. Mr. Westbrook, can we speak for a moment? Emma's voice interrupted his thoughts. He turned, and there she was again, standing at the threshold of the room, her expression calm, her eyes steady. She had that same quiet confidence, the kind that made Michael both admire and resent her. He nodded, gesturing for her to come inside. I wanted to check in on Alex, she said, her gaze lingering on his son. I think he's ready for something more. Michael frowned, not fully understanding. What do you mean? Emma stepped forward, her tone thoughtful. He's stable now. The liquid I gave him helped, but now it's about the next phase. It's about giving him the strength to wake up fully, and that requires more than just medicine. Michael's brow furrowed in confusion. I don't understand. What are you saying? He's still unconscious. What else can we do? Emma smiled softly, her eyes flickering to Alex's still form. It's not about doing more, Mr. Westbrook. It's about letting go and trusting that the body knows how to heal itself. We've given him a chance, but now it's up to him. Michael took a deep breath, staring at the machines, the sterile environment that had become his prison for the past week. His son's recovery had defied the odds, but the more time he spent here, the more he realized something unsettling. He didn't want to let go. He wanted to control every aspect of his son's recovery, just as he had controlled every aspect of his business, his life, and his future. I don't know how to let go, he muttered, almost to himself. Emma placed a hand on his shoulder, a gentle touch that sent an unexpected shock through him. Her voice was soft but firm. That's the hardest part, Mr. Westbrook. But if you want to truly save your son, you have to let go. You have to trust him. Trust life. Michael shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. Trust life? Life doesn't give a damn about trust. Life takes what it wants. She didn't respond immediately, instead walking to the window and staring out at the city below. The New York skyline glittered in the late afternoon sun, the streets below bustling with activity, completely indifferent to the lives of the people inside the hospital. You're right, she said quietly. Life doesn't always play fair, but it's not about fairness. It's about accepting the things we can't change and having the courage to face them. Michael felt a pang in his chest. Her words, though simple, cut through his defenses in a way nothing else had. He had spent his entire life avoiding vulnerability, running from anything that made him feel weak or out of control. But now, with his son's life in the balance, he couldn't escape it any longer. It was a choice between power and trust, between control and letting go. Alex isn't just a businessman like me, Michael said, more to himself than Emma. He's my son. I can't just let go and hope everything works out. I need to know that he's going to be okay. I understand, Emma said softly. But sometimes the best way to ensure that someone is okay is to stop trying to control every moment. Let him wake up on his own terms. There was a long silence, and for a moment, Michael could only watch as Emma's words sank in. The weight of his own pride and fear pressed down on him, making him feel small and powerless. I'm afraid, he admitted quietly, the words tasting foreign on his tongue. Afraid of losing him. Afraid that everything I built will fall apart. Emma turned back to face him, her expression sympathetic. "I think you're afraid of something deeper than that. You're afraid of facing the fact that you can't control everything, and that sometimes the best way to keep the people you love safe is to trust them." Michael swallowed hard, his throat tight. The truth in her words hit him harder than he expected. Letting go, it wasn't just about his son. It was about facing his own fears, his own limitations. It was about realizing that true strength wasn't about control. It was about accepting the unknown and trusting that it would lead him to the right place. The next few days felt like an eternity. Time stretched endlessly, each minute hanging in the air like a heavy weight that Michael could hardly bear. The hospital room, once full of frantic energy and medical urgency, now felt almost tranquil, but the stillness only seemed to heighten the tension in his chest. He was no longer pacing the room, no longer giving orders to doctors or demanding answers. He had surrendered himself to this strange, unwelcome reality. His son was still in a coma, but the signs of improvement were subtle yet undeniable. The heart monitor continued to beep in a steady rhythm, and Alex's breathing was now more even, less labored than before. Every morning when Michael arrived at the hospital, he would stare at his son, hoping for a miracle, waiting for the moment when Alex would finally open his eyes and speak. And every night, he'd leave the hospital, his mind full of doubts and questions. He still couldn't grasp the idea that Emma's unassuming belief in that strange, ancient liquid could be the reason for his son's recovery. Michael was a man of facts, of data and control. This mysticism felt like something from another world, a world he didn't understand and couldn't control. But Emma, she had remained constant, a quiet force in the background, reminding him daily that the most powerful thing one could offer was trust. Trust in life, trust in the healing process, trust that sometimes the best way to solve a problem was to stop trying to fix it. Michael watched her closely now. She spent most of her time by Alex's side, monitoring his recovery and speaking softly to him as if he could hear her, as if he could respond. She didn't try to assert control over the situation. She just was there. Every time she spoke, every time she made eye contact with him, there was an unspoken reminder that maybe, just maybe, his son's recovery didn't require control at all. One afternoon, after several days of progress, Emma turned to Michael with a gentle but serious look in her eyes. "I think it's time," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael looked at her, his mind racing. "Time for what?" "To let him go," she answered. "To let him wake up when he's ready. He's been holding on, but I think he's waiting for you to let go." Michael's heart skipped a beat. The idea of relinquishing control, of allowing his son to wake on his own, seemed impossible. What if Alex woke up and was too weak? What if this was all a temporary recovery, something that could disappear as quickly as it had come? "You're saying I should just stop trying?" he asked, his voice rough, betraying his fear. Emma nodded. "Sometimes you have to trust that he'll wake up when he's ready. You can't force it, Michael. You can't rush him." Michael stared at his son's still form, torn between his fatherly instincts and the overwhelming sense of helplessness that had plagued him since the beginning of this crisis. How could he just let go? How could he leave his son's fate in the hands of something so unpredictable? But then, something inside him shifted. He thought back to all the times in his life when he had over-controlled situations, when he had forced his will on others, believing that it was the only way to achieve his goals. His empire, his wealth, his power, They had all been built on the foundation of control. But what had it really brought him? A successful business? Yes. Power? Yes. But at the cost of emotional distance, at the cost of relationships, and most painfully at the cost of his own humanity. Michael's chest tightened as he thought about his relationship with Alex. Was this how he had treated his son all these years? Had he been so focused on building his legacy, on ensuring Alex followed in his footsteps, that he had forgotten to simply be there for him? He looked at Alex again, the young man who had spent his life in his father's shadow, the man who had been groomed to take over everything Michael had built, but who was now lying helpless and vulnerable, dependent on trust, not wealth. Maybe you're right, Michael murmured, more to himself than to Emma. Maybe this isn't about me fixing everything. Maybe this is about me learning to let go. Emma smiled softly, her eyes filled with understanding. It's not easy, she said, but it's the only way. The words lingered in the room as Michael took a long, steadying breath. The weight of his own pride and fear had held him in place for so long. But now, as he looked at his son, he felt a shift, a softening of the hardness that had once defined him. This wasn't about business anymore. This wasn't about control. This was about something far more precious, his son's life and his relationship with him. Michael felt a tear slip down his cheek, surprising him. He quickly wiped it away, trying to regain some semblance of control. But the surrender was already happening. He had already made the decision. He had to let go. Later that evening, as the lights in the hospital room dimmed and the shadows grew longer, Michael sat beside Alex's bed. His son's breathing was steady, and for the first time in days, Michael felt like he could breathe too. He placed a hand gently on his son's, feeling the warmth of his skin. "I'm here," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm here and I'm not leaving. But you need to wake up, son. You need to fight this on your own. I'm not going to try to fix everything anymore." For the first time in what felt like forever, Michael felt like he was truly present. He wasn't trying to control Alex's fate. He wasn't trying to force the outcome. He was simply here, offering love, offering trust, and offering hope. And that was enough. The next morning, as the first rays of dawn crept through the window, something remarkable happened. The steady beeping of the heart monitor quickened, and Alex's hand twitched slightly. Michael's breath caught in his throat, his eyes widening in disbelief. Alex was waking up. It wasn't a dramatic, immediate moment of clarity. It wasn't some grand Hollywood recovery scene, but it was enough. Alex was fighting on his own terms, not under the weight of his father's expectations or the burden of his empire. And in that moment, Michael realized something that would change him forever. He had always believed that control was everything, but it was trust, the willingness to let go, that had given him his son back. The morning light filtered gently through the blinds, casting a soft glow across the hospital room. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Michael Westbrook sat beside his son's bed without the oppressive weight of fear or doubt clouding his mind. He had let go. He had trusted. And now, Alex was finally waking up. It was subtle at first, just a slight movement of his fingers, then a small shift of his head on the pillow. But to Michael, it felt like the world had just shifted back into alignment. Alex was alive. And more than that, he was fighting to come back, just as he always had. Michael's breath caught in his throat as he leaned forward, his heart pounding in his chest. Was this it? Was this the moment they had both been waiting for? Alex, Michael whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Son, can you hear me? At first, there was no response. But then, Alex's eyelids fluttered open, revealing his dark brown eyes, still glazed with the remnants of sleep and confusion, but unmistakably alive. Dad! Alex's voice was hoarse, weak, but it was enough to send a rush of relief flooding through Michael's chest. He reached out, placing a trembling hand on his son's, careful not to overwhelm him with his emotion. I'm here, son. I'm here, Michael said, his voice thick with emotion. He felt his own tears sting at the corners of his eyes, but this time they weren't tears of fear or grief. They were tears of relief, of hope. Alex blinked several times, trying to focus on his father's face, confusion still clouding his features. What happened? Where am I? You're in the hospital, son, Michael said softly. You've been very sick, but you're going to be okay now. You're going to be just fine. Alex's brow furrowed slightly, his memories slowly coming back. The liquid, that woman. Emma? Michael nodded, a small, bittersweet smile tugging at his lips. Yes, Emma. She helped save you. Alex's eyes widened in confusion. But I don't understand. What did she do? Michael hesitated for a moment, choosing his words carefully. It's not about what she did, Alex. It's about what we've all been holding on to. The truth is, we don't have control over everything. Not over life, not over death, not even over each other. Emma, she taught me that. Alex seemed to process the words, his mind still foggy but beginning to clear. You mean, you're saying we don't control anything? Like, life is just random? No, Michael said firmly but gently. It's not about randomness. It's about trust. Trust in each other. Trust in the process, and trust in life itself. I've spent my whole life trying to control everything, trying to fix everything with money and power. But it doesn't work that way. Alex's gaze softened, his understanding growing as he took his father's words. I get it now. All this time, you were trying to fix everything, and maybe that's why we've both been so lost. Michael nodded, his chest tightening at the realization of just how far he had pushed his son in the wrong direction. I pushed you, Alex. I thought I was giving you everything, but I was taking everything from you. You never had a chance to live on your own terms. Alex's hand shifted under his father's, his grip weak but steady. I was afraid, Dad. Afraid of disappointing you. Afraid of not living up to your expectations. But I don't want to live like that anymore. I don't want to be just a reflection of your success. I want to find my own way. The words were a revelation, not just for Alex, but for Michael, too. His son was no longer the heir to his empire. He was becoming his own person, forging a path for himself, one that didn't rely on the control Michael had tried so desperately to impose. And for the first time, Michael felt a sense of peace settle in his chest. It was a peace of acceptance, of knowing that his son wasn't a commodity, a means to an end. He was a person, a human being with his own dreams, desires, and needs. I'm proud of you, Alex, Michael said, his voice thick with emotion. I'm proud of you for letting go, for finding your own way. Alex smiled weakly, his eyes tired but filled with determination. I think we both have a lot to learn, Dad, but I'm ready. For the first time in years, Michael saw his son not as a reflection of himself, but as an individual with his own strength and purpose. The bond between them was no longer defined by control and expectation. It was rooted in something far deeper: love, respect, and trust. As the days passed, Alex continued to improve. His recovery was slow but steady, a miracle in itself. Given the odds, Emma remained by their side, always in the background, always watching, always waiting for the next step. She had given them both the gift of perspective, of seeing the world through a new lens. For Michael, the experience had changed him. He wasn't the same man who had walked into that hospital days ago, desperate and consumed by the need for control. Now, he was a father who understood that there were things in life that couldn't be controlled, that could only be trusted. Alex's recovery wasn't just about his health. It was about their entire relationship, about healing the wounds they had both carried for so long. As Michael stood by the window that evening, watching the sun set over the city, he felt a sense of calm he hadn't felt in years. The empire he had built still stood, but it no longer felt like the center of his universe. The center of his world now was Alex, their relationship, their future, and the trust they had learned to share. For the first time, Michael Westbrook was ready to let go. And in doing so, he had finally found what he had been searching for all along: true freedom.